Alright, what's going on, you guys? It's your friendly neighborhood Nick Man here. And I am in the sleepy little town of Cerrillos, New Mexico. Well, actually, outside of the little sleepy little town. And a while ago, I made a video of me trying to find a grave of a historically important person who knew, let's just say on their last day of life, they were especially close to the person who would end up becoming president. So, let's see if we can get in here. Alright, hold on, we'll be right back. Alright, sorry about that. We had a little problem trying to get the little gate they have up here down. Well, anyway, I apologize for the wind. Where I was coming from wasn't too windy out, but you guys here just really is really windy. I wasn't expecting it to be this windy. Could be worse though. Well, before I go to the grave that I'm looking for, because I already know where it's at, and just go through the backstory of the person we're talking about today. We're talking about a man. His name was Henry Clay Green. He was born in the 1860s in North Carolina. And then around the time he was, I don't know, about maybe 6 or 7, his family had made the great pilgrimage out west, originally to Texas. And then when he was 16, they made their way out to Cerrillos, New Mexico to start doing gold mining. And so he came from a really large family, very large. And being one of the eldest, he was tasked with having to help the family out, to make an income and everything, and help the dad, the father, Mr. Green. So they ended up doing a little mining here, and did a little wagon stuff with wagons. And they ended up saving their money, and they ended up buying this old house here in Cerrillos. I didn't see the writing on the back of that one. Come on, turn around. And they ended up turning that property into a lucrative hotel here in Cerrillos. And that hotel would also house the local doctor, the dentist, and other businesses, law offices, and what have you. I think law offices, I can't remember. It's been a while since I wrote it. Dang. The wind is messing with my stuff. So anyway, Henry became a manager of a mining company up close to Santa Fe. And on that fateful day in 1898, the world would change forever when the USS Maine blew up. People at the time thought it was a Spanish mine because of the issues that the U.S. government and the Spanish government over the Cuba's independence, along with Puerto Rico and the Philippines and what have you. And so the U.S. declared war. Well, this man in New York by the name of Theodore Roosevelt had this great idea to see about getting volunteers from out west, cowboys, miners, caballeros, you name, what else, even outlaws in some aspects, ranchers, pretty much everyone who could handle a gun and who knew how to handle themselves out in the open territory like what we are right now. It's a very good example of the territory of the West. Henry Green was one of the men that signed up. He quit his job and he enlisted into the 1st New Mexico Cavalry. Oh man, this volunteer cavalry. This wind is ridiculous, getting worse. Well, that's not where he's not buried over there. He's buried back over there. I just wanted to come out this way, but we might end up turning around because of how bad the wind is. All right. So him and a bunch of the other what would later become known as the Rough Riders, ended up taking the Southwest Pacific, no, that doesn't sound right. Southeastern. No, they took a train to Florida so they could do final training and preparations for the assault on Cuba. And so they went there for a few months and they did their preparations and everything, and he was one of the very few who was able to go. Now, the trip to Cuba was a fiasco in some aspects. I don't know what is going on with this thing. Okay, stop it. Alright, it was a fiasco in some aspects because most of the cavalry, they couldn't go without their horses because they didn't have room for them on the ships. And then once the troopers made it to Cuba, getting off the ships was another problem because this was America's very first amphibious assault. And it was a fiasco to say the least, but they still got ashore. But the one thing that the cavalry wasn't planning for was fighting as infantry. So they managed to fight their way through from the beach, through the jungles, to what would become the famous Battle of San Juan Hill, which would lead our protagonist to his untimely fate. It's hard to believe that cemetery. It took me years to find this cemetery after finding the story of Henry Clay Green. I thought the cemetery thought he was buried at what later I found out was the Catholic cemetery. And it took me a long time to figure out I was looking around the wrong cemetery. And I didn't even know that this one was here. We'll get back to the story here in a second and just take a look at these. No more writing. It's so badly. Oh wow. Some pictures here and then a video and then okay, so back to the story. Now, the day of the Battle of San Juan Hill, the U.S. soldiers... Well, I almost stepped on this. This is a grave right here. Almost stepped on that. I probably stepped on a bunch of graves and didn't even know it. There's another one that's coming up too. Okay, so on that day of the Great Battle... Ooh, I can smell it. Ooh. Okay, so on the day of that battle, they had a fight ahead of them because the Spanish had more modern European weapons, whereas the Americans had, let's just say the least, lackluster. They had the Hotchkiss revolving cannon, which was like the Gatling gun from the Civil War 30 years before. They were using the new 30-40 Krag rifle, which was underpowered than the Spanish Mauser rifle of the time. The pistols were 38s, couldn't really do any stopping damage whatsoever. And the only thing that was fairly decent was the first American machine gun, which was called the Colt Potato Digger, because it had a charging handle underneath the barrel, and every time I would shot, it would look like a hole in the ground in the shape of a potato, like you're digging potatoes. So that's what it became known as. The Spanish had the Maxim machine guns. They had almost state-of-the-art cannons and everything. But what got them in the end was tactics. So anyway, while the young trooper was with the rest of them that day, he was Colonel Roosevelt's orderly. Well, his job was to, feed him, make sure all his stuff was in order, and to just, make sure his day went by smoothly, like a secretary, in a way. Sadly, this would be the last day of his. So they charged up Kettle Hill, and they took Kettle Hill. And it was a very bloody fight. And you see pictures of the Rough Riders. They're charging up the hills, and they're on horseback, which is a lie. They did not have horses. They couldn't take the horses with them because they didn't have the space on the ships for them. And some other reasons, I can't remember why. There's another grave. So after the assault on Kettle Hill, Theodore Roosevelt gave the order. Colonel Roosevelt gave the order to do the assault on the second hill, known as San Juan Hill. Which nobody knows that there was two names for there were two hills in the battle. So, and it was during this final assault on the second hill that our protagonist was shot twice through the heart, and he died. He died instantly. And the army went on to win the battle and later the war. Spain lost what was left of their colonial territories in the New World, dating back to the time of Christopher Columbus. Ended in 1899. 400-year empire slowly chipped away over the course of 150 years, or even more. So, after the battle, the night following the battle, Trooper Green his commanding officer gave the order to bury the dead where they fell. And he was buried on a hill where he fell. Somewhere right there, like that. Just right there on the hill. Granted, this isn't it. However, that's not where the story ends. So a short time after the war, once the shots and everything are done, peace is made. There was efforts by the government and by families of the fallen to be brought home and buried here at home in the U.S. Either it being in a national cemetery or a family cemetery. And so Trooper Green was exhumed from his hillside grave and brought home in a hermetically sealed coffin. And many people heeded the warning that was left on the coffin for them not to open it. And he was brought back here to Cerrillos, where everybody in town mostly everybody knew each other. Everybody closed up shop for the day to honor the fallen trooper. He gave his life for the American flag. And so the procession from the town side of Cerrillos came down the road that I came down, the old little wagon road. And he was followed by his fellow troopers, as well as vets of the Civil War and other veterans. And it was here. Alright, it was here that he was laid to rest over 120 years ago. He is buried here with his parents and his brother, who was killed in a mining accident just before the war started. And there is, there is the grave of the headstone of Trooper Henry Clay Green, Rough Rider, served under the legendary Theodore Roosevelt, and was one of the famous Rough Riders who I grew up hearing stories about, especially growing up in New Mexico. You hear a lot about the Rough Riders. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt came back to New Mexico every year for the anniversary of the Battle of San Juan Hill to meet the Rough Riders in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And I think it was at the Castaneda Hotel. I can't remember. I think it was. But yeah, it's where he's buried at is a beautiful place. Very peaceful here. He's not forgotten. His story should never be forgotten. Sacrifice should never be forgotten either. Behind every headstone there's a story. Depending on the type of story, it's always a story nonetheless, and it should always be remembered. Thank you for your service, Trooper.